All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Discovering the New Dragons. Join me as we may be discovering your new favorite RPG system. So, today, we, in honor of the new source book getting released a little bit early, we are going to be delving into the powers of the morphing grid to look at the Power Rangers RPG. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this stuff, remember to hit the like button. Let's try this again. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important. My brain is not working today. So, let's talk about the Power Rangers RPG and kind of where it came from. So, years ago, I want to say like 2017, 2018, somewhere around there, there was talk of a Power Rangers campaign setting, effectively, or conversion for 5th edition to D&D using the OGL. Now, ignoring all the drama that happened with the OGL, a lot of people were really excited about this, and the studio that was doing it was Renegade Game Studios. Renegade Game Studios actually has a rather impressive number of RPGs under their belt, in addition to just having other IPs that they could develop games for. And before creating an RPG system, they actually had the license for the Power Rangers IP for a little bit before that, because they had released a board game called Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid. It was just a regular board game. It was a cooperative board game where each person would play a Power Ranger and you would try to defeat a monster of the week. Here's the Grid is not only still going on, but they have released expansion after expansion after expansion after expansion. You can play as Hyperforce from Hyper RPG's Power Rangers Hyperforce online series, which did not use this RPG system. It actually used one that Malika, the CEO of Hyper RPG, actually designed herself. You can play as Power Rangers in Space, I think is in there. I think they've added an SPD. There's just tons and tons and tons of Ranger teams that you can play, and you can mix and match them. It's a really, really cool thing. So back to the actual game system itself. Again, this started off as a 5th edition D&D conversion, effectively. But as it kept going, they eventually started realizing that this was not going to work for in the 5th edition D&D system. I'm a huge fan of D&D 5e. I think there's a lot of different things that you can do with it, but there are limitations to the system. The system itself excels when you are playing high fantasy, high magic style adventures, and you can kind of mold that into different things. Like if you look at Eberron is a steampunk style thing. So if you want to have a more technical aspect of it, there are ways to do it. But Power Rangers has never been high fantasy, and while yes, magic exists in the Power Rangers universe, it doesn't really work the way that it does in D&D. The Vancian spellcasting system would seem really weird, and Rangers themselves aren't quite as varied as character classes and subclasses in the D&D. So eventually, the developers of the Power Rangers RPG decided, you know what? It would be best for us to just create our own system. And I don't know timeline-wise when this happened, but they had also been able to secure licensing agreements for a few other IPs, namely Transformers and G.I. Joe. I would assume because Hasbro owns all of them. Hasbro owns Power Rangers, Hasbro owns Transformers, Hasbro owns G.I. Joe. So I would assume they must have gotten some kind of group package or something like that. They had this idea. And so they created this new system called Essence to 20. And they were going to use that system to power Power Rangers, and then also to power G.I. Joe and Transformers. And that's where it came into be. It's been out now for a little over a year. And I will say right now, the original PDF that I still have and the book that I have right back there, it's a little bit rough. They didn't understand, despite the fact that they built the system themselves, they didn't really understand the system super well. And by that, I mean they didn't understand how to explain it to people that didn't create it very well. And so the original book itself has some poorly worded sections that make it very difficult to understand. The subsequent books fix all of those issues. And if you get the most recent book, that right now only the PDF is available, but the physical will be available, I think, in June. It is much more solid and much easier to read, and I have no problems with it. But so that's basically where this system came from. Is it started as D&D 5th edition, and you can still see some of the 5th edition skeleton in there. There are certain things, and I made mention of this in my in-depth review of it, there are certain things in here that make sense in 5th edition D&D that don't really make sense in Power Rangers, like the armor system. That in and of itself is just not super well defined in the game, and it just doesn't quite work. It's not that it breaks the game or anything like that. It just feels awkward. It feels kind of tacked on because, well, it's an RPG. You have to have armor. But other than that, like I said, it came out about a year ago. They just released their first new supplement for it. There's also I think I've got it right here somewhere. Here it is. There is also an adventure for it that I did an in-depth review for as well. Adventures in Angel Grove. Really, really great, fun adventure. Highly recommend it. And yeah, they have another core book coming out, effectively like a monster manual style thing, coming out this summer. And then there's another core book coming out that actually is for all 3 Essence 20 systems to create crossover adventures. So lots of stuff happening for Essence to 20. It seems to be doing well, which is always a plus. So let's talk about the lore of Power Rangers. Moving on. By the way, ginger beer is lovely. And for anyone wondering, ginger beer is like root beer in the idea that it is brewed like a beer, but there's no alcohol in it. However, it has a very high ginger content, which is great for settling upset stomachs. So I will be drinking this throughout. So, moving on. Let's talk about the lore. Power Rangers as a franchise, technically, the inspiration for it started in the late 70s. There is a series in Japan called Super Sentai. Like I said, has been going since the 70s. And in the late 80s, a producer named Hayam Saban had this idea that a show involving like teenage superheroes in color coordinated outfits that used giant robots to destroy monsters would be super popular in the US. And he had this brilliant idea that because the superheroes all wear masks that don't let you see their faces, they theoretically wouldn't have to film most of their own action scenes. They could use the footage of Super Sentai and then just dub them over with American actors, and then every so often film some scenes when they're out of their costumes to create their own show. They wouldn't be beholden to any of the plots or anything there. They just would have to find unique ways to use the footage. The first pitch he made was actually for a season that actually never made it to the US. It was called Biomen, which was based on Super Sentai Biomen. And actually Mark Dacascos, which is, if you've ever watched Iron Chef America, he plays the chairman. He was actually the Red Ranger in that. Nobody bit, and so it went a little bit longer. And then in 1993, he pitched Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, And one of the studios thought, hey, let's try this out. And then Power Rangers became this massive, massive thing. But as far as the in-game lore, the Power Rangers themselves are a team of heroes that protect a planet or an area in general. And they are powered by this thing called the morphing grid. The morphing grid is this energy field. Kind of, if you want to go into episode 1 Phantom Menace style explanations, it's this energy field that kind of sits underneath everything and kind of combines it. And the Power Rangers themselves, whoever the mentor of the Rangers is, finds a way to harness this power to create suits of armor for them that just happen to look like spandex. And they also use it to power their Zords, which are their giant robots that they use to fight large monsters. It powers their weapons. It powers everything that they do is all based off of this morphing grid energy. The Power Rangers RPG actually has a unique set of lore compared to the television series. The television series has its own lore, and the comic books have their own lore. So the Power Rangers RPG is in its own little sub-dimension of Power Rangers, but the basics of it are all there. The kind of inciting incident that gets the first team of Power Rangers started on planet Earth is Rita Repulsa, who is an evil space witch, has decided to take over the planet Earth, and Zordon, who is a space wizard that has been locked in a time chamber, has been battling Rita Repulsa for centuries. And so he activates his computer, his robotic counterpart Alpha 5, and selects five teenagers with attitude to become the Power Rangers by using these special things called the Power Coins. And that's what connects them, along with their morphers, to the morphing grid and gives them all of their powers. That's effectively kind of the lore of Power Rangers in general, is you are going to have some sort of morphing device that allows you to morph into your Power Ranger persona. Each character is powered by a different spectrum from the grid. And each spectrum tends to emphasize certain things, like the red spectrum tends to emphasize leadership qualities. And so Rangers that are effectively chosen by the red spectrum tend to be leaders of their teams. Most Power Rangers teams, the Red Ranger is the leader of the team, with a few rare exceptions. Things like Time Force, the Pink Ranger was actually the leader of the team. Things like that. And so that's really where the lore kind of starts and kind of ends. There are multiple things like, again, Rita is, the big baddie that they have in the core book, but there's also her boss and eventually her husband, Lord Zed, who is kind of an evil space wizard that is terrifying to look at. And there are other things like Dark Spectre, who is a kind of almost primal force of evil that is constantly battling good. And each different season of Power Rangers tends to have a different big baddie. Whether it's Astronema and Dark Spectre from Power Rangers in Space, or Trakina and her father in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. That's kind of what you look for. So as far as the lore is concerned, one of the nice things about this is they give you a very wide berth of lore that you can use. And then because this system is kind of built into its own continuity, you are welcome to kind of go and use as much or as little lore as you want. Compared to something like the Forgotten Realms. The Forgotten Realms has tons and tons and tons of lore. And if you're going to play in the Forgotten Realms, because of how developed the Forgotten Realms are, it's very difficult to just kind of change the lore willy-nilly. You know, you really do have to stick to, okay, well, these are the deities that exist, and you know, the Drow are from the Underdark, and Dragonborn are actually from Aber and not from Toro, and you know, the more you change the lore, the more difficult it is to run any pre-written adventures. They kind of rely on you using that. Power Rangers is a little bit different. First of all, it's set on Earth, so you can always use the current climate of Earth to help develop. You can pick your own city. They give you a make-believe city called Angel Grove, which is meant to be a stand-in for either San Francisco. This one particularly, I think, is supposed to be San Francisco. But Angel Grove is always meant to be kind of a stand-in for either San Francisco or Los Angeles, one of those kind of West Coast large cities. So, that being said, the lore itself is deep enough that you're not going to have to make it up yourself. The Morphing Grid has things like the Morphing Masters, who are kind of embodiments of the Morphing Grid given sentience. And they recently explained the first group of Power Rangers and how they connect to a being called the Morphonaut and things like that. So there's plenty of lore there. But you're more than welcome to create your own lore, as I did when I ran my short mini campaign this last December. I created my own Power Rangers team. I didn't use Zordon. I did use Rita. And my Power Rangers team wasn't the first Power Rangers on Earth. The first Power Rangers on Earth were centuries and centuries ago, and they're kind of filling their shoes. So, yeah, that's the lore. Moving on. Let's talk about dice rolls and mechanics. Basically, how are you going to feel when you are playing this game, and what are you going to do? The Essence 20 system is based on the Essence scores, which are called the 4 S's. Very clever naming pattern. But the 4 attributes that you have, compared to like DnD, where you have 6, strength, dexterity, wisdom, constitution, intelligence, charisma. Essence, you only have 4, and they are strength, speed, smarts, and social. They have a number of defined skills that fit into one of those things, like there's strength-based skills, there's speed-based skills, things like that. And then underneath that, you can have any number of specializations that kind of harness that to a very specific part. As far as the dice that you're going to be using, you will always be rolling a d20. So you will always be rolling your d20 that you always have. But anytime you make a roll, it is going to be based on a skill of some sort. It might be strength, it might be speed. But what happens is, depending on how many times you have trained in that skill, it will add to your skill dice. Skill dice, the way that all rolls work is you roll a d20, and then you also roll whatever your skill dice are. It starts as a d2, which is a coin flip, which for Power Rangers makes perfect sense because they have power coins. And if you buy the actual Power Rangers dice from Renegade Studios, you actually get a power coin for your d2. But if you don't have that, you can take literally any die, and any odd number is heads and any even number is tails. So you don't need a coin to flip. You can use any die that you have. But the more training you get, it eventually goes to a d4, a d6, a d8, a d10, 2d6, things like that. And so as you roll, as you increase your skill levels, you get the ability to just roll bigger dice and sometimes more dice. And then if you have a specialization in that particular skill, you actually get to roll not only the d20, but you get to roll every skill die that you have unlocked leveling up. So let's say your skill die is a d6. If you're specialized in it, you roll your d20, and then you add either your d2, your d4, or your d6, whichever one is the highest. So specialization becomes very, very important because it just gives you so many more options for if you accidentally roll low on one of them, well, there's all these other ones that might be rolling higher. The other thing that's unique about this is how the critical hit aspect works. If your skill die rolls the maximum number possible, On that die, so let's say it's a d4. If you roll a 4 on your d of a 4 as part of your check, and you succeed the check, you get basically a critical hit. You get a extreme success, or I can't remember what they call it here. Essence scores and skills. This isn't nearly as difficult as I'm making it sound. Using skills. Choose skills. Shift. We'll talk about that in just a second. Roll skill test. Success, failure, fumble. Critical success. That's what they call it. So critical success. Now, if you're specialized in it, if any one of your dice that you roll, other than the D2, you can't crit on a D2. If any one of the dice you roll hits its maximum, even if you don't use that die because it's not the highest, it counts as a critical success. So specialization becomes even more important the more skill dice you have unlocked, and becomes very, very useful. In addition to that, there's also what's called shifting. Shifting is basically a way that when you are rolling, you can go, well, you know what, I have the high ground, so I think I should have a bonus to this. Or, you know what, I have them flanked, I think I should be able to do better. Or, you know what, I'm in a disadvantaged position because I pulled a muscle earlier, so this is going to be a little bit more difficult. You can shift the roll, which basically increases or decreases the skill die that you're using. All the way up to, if you shift it enough, you can actually get an automatic success or an automatic critical success, depending on how you use your shifting. Then there is also edge and snag, which that is one of the relics from D&D 5th edition. They are the advantage-disadvantage system. You know, if you have an edge on a roll, you roll 2 d20s and take the higher of the two. If you have a snag on it, you roll 2 d20s, you take the lower of the two. But it only affects your d20, not your skill dice. And then the final kind of mechanic that can be used to kind of affect things, you have these things called story points. Story points are just ways that you can affect the situation. Sometimes it can give you a bonus to your fence, your defense. It can let you re-roll ones. There's a lot of different things. You generally get story points for role-playing, or certain aspects of your character will have ways for you to earn story points. But the story points are kept in a pool for the players, and then the game master actually has their own pool of story points that they can use for their NPCs and the things like that. So that, for the most part, is how dice rolls and mechanics kind of work for this. Every dice roll is going to be a d20 plus at least one skill die. You're never going to be adding, well, you will add multiple skill dice, I guess, once you get above certain levels. And then there's shifts and edges and snags to have a lot of different ways that your GM can kind of reward good role playing or react to different situations without having to use a bunch of floating modifiers, which in my personal opinion are just not fun. It's like, well, you get a +2 from that, but you get a -1 from that, and then a +3 from that, and then a -7 for that, and you have to do all this extra math. Snag and edge, super easy. Roll 2 dice, either pick the higher or the lower. Shifting, okay, we're just going to make you roll a different die, and there's a really easy to use ladder that you can just look at and go, okay, we're shifting up 2 points. Or you can shift up 2 and shift down 1, and it's really, really simple, really, really easy. It doesn't require all this extra math. Just figure out what you're rolling, and once you roll, you are golden. So, yeah! That's dice rolls and mechanics. Moving on. Character creation. One of the things I think the Essence 20 system does better than any other system I have played is your basic makeup for a character in general, in most RPGs. And this was pioneered by the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and everyone has kind of gotten used to this with 5th edition, is you will have your race, your class, and now what's becoming exceedingly more common is also having a background. Those 3 aspects tend to make up your character in almost every single RPG that currently exists. And a lot of that has to do with just how popular 5th edition has been and the fact that they added backgrounds. Technically, backgrounds started showing up in 4th edition as far as like mechanical benefits. 4th edition is where they started, and 5th edition just kind of refined them to something. But most systems, your race and your background really only matter at character creation. 5th edition has been trying to modify this so that they're a little bit more useful as you level up and do other things, but they really haven't succeeded very well. In the Essence 20 system, you have 3 different aspects, just like other things, but they're called your origin, your role, and your influences. Your origin, from a mechanics standpoint, is closest to your race. In the idea that if we're comparing this to D&D 5th edition, your origin is going to give you your starting health. It's going to give you some skills that you're trained in. It is very much, and it's also going to change at least 1 or 2 of your essence scores. So your origin is very much like your race in D&D 5th edition, where you'll get some modifiers to attributes, you'll get some special abilities. That's what the origin is. As far as lore-wise, what is the origin? It's exactly what it sounds like. It is the origin of where you come from. You know, kind of to give you an example, like one of the origins is athletics. So you are an athlete. You tend to do, when you're not a Power Rangers, you tend to do athletic kind of things. If you're sticking with the student theme that most Power Rangers teams use, where they're all a bunch of, you know, teenagers in high school, maybe you're on the track team or the wrestling team or something like that. Another origin is kind. You generally just tend to be a kind person. So origin, for the most part, I think if you were to give it another name or kind of describe it, I would say motivation tends to be a pretty good moniker for origin as well. The origin fits pretty well, but it is one of the prime motivators for why you do things and how you do things. So roles, on the other hand, are your classes. And I have spoken, I actually made an entire video talking about how I would quote unquote fix the Power Rangers RPG, because they tie your role to your color spectrum. And I mentioned in the lore section, there is precedent to certain colors tend to have certain characteristics that match them. Things like the Blue Ranger. For the most part, the Blue Ranger tends to be the more tech-savvy style character. Most Blue Rangers have something to do with tech, but it's not universal. There are some Blue Rangers that are much more kind of defensive, protector-style things. The Black Ranger kind of has a dual thing where they can either be a bit of a cut-up or cool kind of character. They can be a bit more of like a cut-up comic relief style character, or they can be a very kind of cool, mysterious, you know, tall, you know, dark and mysterious style character. Things like that. So the roles in the Power Rangers RPG are things like the Black Ranger is a role. Blue Ranger, Pink Ranger, things like that. They do mention in here, if you want to play a Black Ranger, but black isn't your favorite color and you'd like to be a different color, you can change the color, which is one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of tying your class to your color. And so I actually went and made an entire list of alternate names for the roles so that they're not tied to two colors. And you can find that on this channel, just looking for fixing the Power Rangers RPG. That being said, the classes themselves, they go from level 1 to 20. All of them tend to have kind of a defining feature or something kind of specific to them. Like the Black Ranger, their special thing is called quips and speeches, and they have a limited number of those that they can use per day. And they can use those different things to do different things. They can support the team. They can, you know, debilitate the bad guys. That's their special thing. If you go to something like the Green Ranger, their kind of defining feature is what's called Solo Strike, where if they're fighting a creature and they're the only one fighting that creature, then they do a little bit more damage. They get to upshift their attacks, which can be very, very beneficial. In addition to that, every ranger has what's called personal power, which is how you activate certain other aspects of your ranger. And you will also get these things called perks. They're effectively feats. There's a bunch of different types of perks. You have general perks. You have general perks. You have grid powers, which are Power Ranger specific perks, and then you also have Zord perks because you get to build your Zord. But certain perks will require you to use your personal power as well. And yeah, and then like I said, 1 to 20, as you level up, you get more cool things that can do more interesting things. One thing I do like about this is hit points. Attacks and things like that will do like 1 or 2. Like really, really powerful ones might do 3 damage, but you're not going to have 100 or 200 hit points. You're generally going to have no more than maybe like 10 or 20 hit points for any given character. So again, less math. I'm a fan of that. The final aspect of your character is called your influences. And influences are, again, kind of similar in 5th edition to your background. And the interesting thing about influences is you can take a single influence or you can take multiple influences to kind of mold and create a very unique character yourself. To give you an idea, like one of the influences is called artisan. So if you wanted to be like an actor, that would be, basically any kind of artist. So an actor or a sculptor or something like that. Again, comparing it to 5th edition, your background is effectively your job before you became an adventurer. And your influence is effectively your job or your hobby when you are not Power Rangering. So artisan, you are some sort of artist. You can also be martial artist is one of the influence. So if you wanted to create, I want to be a stuntman, you could choose the martial artist influence and the artisan influence with an emphasis in acting, and now you're a stuntman. The interesting thing about it is each influence has a perk, something that you can do that other characters without that background or that influence can't, but they also have hang-ups. And the unique thing about hang-ups is the first background you choose, you don't have to take the hang-up. But every subsequent background you take, you do have to take the hang-up. And that gives you some sort of debilitation that makes it more difficult for you to do certain things and actually adds to the character. So one of the things I tend to recommend for people making a Power Rangers character is I tend to recommend go ahead and choose at least 2 influences, because you want to have at least one hang-up. And that also means you can be very strategic about which one you choose, quote-unquote, first. Because you're only going to have to take the hang-up from the quote-unquote second one. So you can go, well, which hang-up is going to fit my character better? Yeah. So overall, creating a character is not an incredibly difficult thing to do, though, again, in the Power Rangers core book itself, it is not super clear about certain aspects of it, specifically kind of your skill training and things like that. That comes from your origin is really convoluted in this book. I highly recommend picking up either G.I. Joe or Transformers, because it just explains it better. But it's once you understand it, it's really not difficult to build your character. One of the other things that I like about the system is because you are going to be a Power Rangers team, this system lends itself really well to group character creation. And by that, I mean most of the D&D games I run, and even the Open Legend game I ran for Zelda Universe, character creation is something I do individually with each player. We will go, okay, what are you thinking about? And we will develop the character together. And I do that specifically so that the characters themselves can have secrets and things like that that come out while we're playing. I think that's really, really fun. And I do that for every one of my campaigns. For this one of the rules of the game is you're not supposed to have two characters that are the same role, because the morphing grid can only focus power for a single spectrum on a single person. So you can't have two people playing the same role. Because of that, it does kind of almost require you, at least for part of character creation, to kind of sit down and go, okay, who wants to play what role, so that no one is going to be bringing two Black Rangers or two Pink Rangers to the table. And I'm not 100% against it. If you go back to my Power Rangers RPG that I ran, the mini campaign, which is called Power Rangers Night Sentinels. We actually had a session 0 where we basically live streamed us all creating our characters and stuff like that, and it was massively fun. And it did mean, like, I still had individual conversations with players so they could have some secrets in their background. But it was a really positive, fun experience for everyone. And we had a blast for the month that we did it. It was absolutely phenomenal and amazing. So yeah, excuse me. So that is character creation. Moving on. Now let's talk about monsters. Power Rangers RPG in and of itself, and Power Rangers in general, is kind of where we get the idea of the Monster of the Week style adventure. Obviously, that has existed longer than Power Rangers has, but Power Rangers exemplified it. Every week, every episode, they would have a new monster that would provide a new challenge for them, and at the end of the episode, they'd kill the monster. And that's how it happened every single week. With a few rare exceptions, it was always, oh, look, this is the Monster of the Week. So because of that, the monsters for the Power Rangers RPG are really essential. In the newest book, they actually went and made some slight modifications to how they do and classify the monsters. And they call the monsters threats. Threats are basically your bad guys. And they now have 4 different classifications, which really fits with how Power Rangers work. You have what are called minions. Minions are basically the shock troops. In every Power Rangers episode, they will always have at least a short fight with whatever the minion is. The first minions we dealt with were called putties, and then you got Zed putties, which were putties that also had a little Z on their chest. Then you got Tengu, and then Piranatrons, and what were it? Cogs for Zeo, and Quantrons for space. Each new villain has their own kind of minion that they will throw out in droves. And the Rangers from level 1 all the way up to level 20 are always going to be dealing with these minions. They're designed to kind of outnumber the Rangers in general, and give them, low stake fights. Then you have what are called individuals. These are your Monster of the Week style things. Each, episode that you run, you're going to be dealing generally with 1, maybe 2 individual monsters that you fight against, and they will be involved in the plot somehow. If you want it to be more like the Power Rangers television series, you'll want to tie something about the monster to something in the characters' backstories. Maybe one of the characters, was going to be DJing, and so Rita decides that to challenge them, they're going to take and create a DJ monster, and it's going to take all their DJ equipment. They're going to have to fight the DJ monster. That's how it works in the show, and it sounds stupid, but it's actually a lot of fun. Above that, you have what are called lieutenants. These are effectively recurring monsters. And that's something that I think Power Rangers does really well. Right from the beginning, they had this character called Goldar. He shows up in the very first episode. Goldar is a lieutenant of Rita, and he shows up over and over. Every time he's defeated, he doesn't die. He just retreats back. And that is something that's really, really fun, because you can create these really cool kind of rivalries, especially if a certain lieutenant targets a certain individual. In Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Goldar had almost a vendetta against Jason the Red Ranger. And Jason was the only Ranger who was ever able to fight Goldar individually unmorphed to a standstill. And so those are really interesting things that you can do with this. And then finally, you have what are called the villains. The villains are your big baddie for your season, effectively. And so they're going to be things like Rita or Zed or Astronema, characters that when you get to the end of that season, which might be your entire campaign is just one season, when you get to the end of it, you're going to fight them, and that's going to be a huge climactic battle, and it's going to change the balance. They are the force that the Power Rangers are fighting against. And once they're defeated, either the Power Rangers can retire and a new team will form when a new threat shows up, or as happened in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for basically 5 seasons, when a new threat would emerge, they would get new powers. Sometimes they'd keep their old costumes, sometimes they'd get new outfits and everything. And they'd get new Zords and stuff like that. Either way works. The most recent Power Rangers series, Dino Power Rangers Dino Fury. They did Dino Fury and then Super Dino Fury, and now they're doing Cosmic Fury, where they're getting brand new outfits and brand new powers, and they're going to space and stuff like that. So there is precedent to having campaigns be just one team with one villain, and once they defeat the villain, it's over, or one team deals with multiple villains, each one being worse than the last one. And the actual stat blocks for them kind of reflect that. The stat blocks actually read almost identical to a Power Rangers character sheet. Building threats and things like that is somewhat similar to building a character. You just generally don't give them roles, but they're going to have skills and specialties, and they'll have special powers and things like that. The one problem with the Power Rangers RPG core book is the number of threats that are in there are really, really limited. And most threats have a normal size and a grown size. So, because your Zords are going to be more powerful than your unmorphed things. And that's another kind of defining feature of Power Rangers is you have Zords. You generally get them at 3rd level. And once you get the Zords, basically most sessions, the final fight for the session will be starting off small size. You'll defeat them. And then Rita will go, "Magic wand, make my monster grow!" And she'll throw it, and then they shoot lots of smoke out, and they do a camera angle from the ground so it looks like they're growing, but all they're really doing is crouching down and going, "Rah!" I watched a lot of Power Rangers as a child, and as an adult, and as right now. So yeah. Overall, the threats work. However, the newest book adds a bunch of new threats that make the game significantly easier to run for a GM. And they're effectively going to be releasing a monster manual this summer, which will be essential to being able to do this. You can also just take threats out of G.I. Joe and Transformers and just reskin them, because the Essence 20 system doesn't really change. And the systems themselves are designed to be able to be crossed over. So, yes, there's plenty of stuff out there, but trying to run the entire game with just the core book would be a little bit rough. Moving on. Let's talk about some equipment and magic items. So, we talk about D&D. One of the things that a lot of people like about D&D is magic items. Flame tongue swords, ice brand weapons, Bag of Holding, all those cool things. Cloak of Elvenkind, Dust of Deliciousness, all those really cool things. Well, if we're talking about Power Rangers, their equipment and their weapons is a big part of being a Power Ranger. Each Power Ranger gets their own power weapon. And a lot of times the power weapon itself kind of defines how the character plays. We think Mighty Morphin themselves, The Pink Ranger had a bow, and it was essential in quite a few different fights for her to be really, really good at using her bow. Specifically, the Snizzard fight, she was essential in for fighting it because it kept shooting out. It had its own bow, and it would do that. Or there was another one where it was a frog that could basically eat rangers, and she was able to kind of shoot it and get all the rangers back out. So your power weapon is going to be an extension of your ranger. And all rangers will have things like a sidearm. It's generally you'll have like a gun sidearm and a sword or a baton sidearm built into it as well. And that's some of the most interesting aspects of the Power Rangers, just seeing all the cool stuff that they eventually get access to. And as the Power Rangers get more powerful, they get access to more cool stuff, eventually getting things like battleizers, which is something that showed up in the latest core book that is really cool. But the cool thing about equipment in the Essence 20 system in general, and in Power Rangers specifically, is the Essence 20 system is built on the idea that, unlike something like, especially if you're looking at D&D 3rd or 4th edition, you just would constantly be finding really awesome weapons in the middle of dungeons and just going, oh, this is better than what I've got, and you throw the other one away, you sell it to a merchant or something like that. So you're constantly just getting rid of old stuff and picking up just new stuff randomly. The Essence 20 system is built on an upgrade system. So you can start with a relatively basic weapon, and then you can add upgrades to it. And there's actually rules about rolls that you have to make in order to upgrade your weapons, and it actually turns into a very interesting process that's actually a massive part of your characters. One of the things that surprised me the most when I ran Power Rangers was just how much your weapon is going to change how you play your character, because the damage type, certain damage types will have different effects that you can do from using them. The range and the other things that you can do with it is really, really going to change how you play your character. So when you're creating your character, yes, you need to choose your origin, your role, your influence, but also once you get to equipment, that's almost a fourth part of your character, is just choosing what kind of weapon you're going to use, because that's going to change which skills you want to focus on, because different weapons use different skills and what specializations you're going to want, and it's going to change specifically how you play. Some of the weapons have the ability to, like a whip. One of the traits that you can get for a weapon is called maneuver, which basically means that you can kind of move enemies around when you use it, which can be a massive, massive benefit when you're in combat. Yeah. Overall, the equipment themselves, I really, really like. There are so many different aspects and upgrade types and things like that, and traits for weapons that you really can create very, very unique, very, very interesting weapons. And the weapons are going to vastly change how you play your character compared to something like D&D, where the big difference between using a greatsword and a maul is, well, one does slashing damage and one does blunt damage. And for the most part, there's like 4 monsters in the entirety of every monster manual that has been published for 5th edition that actually care whether you're doing slicing or bludgeoning damage. There's really, it's mostly an aesthetic choice in most other games. In this one, no, your weapon's a big deal, and it's going to be a part of your character, and you need to put some thought and effort into it. And I love that about it. Moving on. Let's talk about GMing the game. Running the game itself is actually pretty easy. I'm going to try this one more at a time. Is actually pretty easy and pretty fun to do. The reason I say that is again, I mentioned before, there are a lot of different ways that you can kind of reward your players, by giving them story points, by giving them upshifts or downshifts, or giving them edge or snags on certain things. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can react to your players being creative. And the system itself is not particularly difficult to run. Everything is going to be based on a skill roll. They have kind of set numbers that you can you use to figure out, what's a difficult check, what's a simple check, things like that. The one thing I'm not particularly fond of is the idea that those numbers are static. They never change as you level up. Any RPG in general, yes, theoretically, easy things should get easier for you, but if you want to continue challenging the players, checks should at least start to increase in difficulty a little bit as you go. 4th edition actually had an entire list for every level where it said this is an easy, this is a medium, this is a hard check for each level, so that you always had a way to challenge them when you wanted to, and you would just have to kind of decide, okay, you're level 20 characters, we don't really need you to roll to break down, the paper thin door here. It'll just happen. So other than that, like, GMing it really is not very difficult at all. I enjoy it. Again, the big thing that you're going to want to be focusing on when you are GMing a Power Rangers game is you want to find threats that are going to be interesting. Again, the thing that's going to make a Power Rangers game the most fun is having these monsters that the players actually want to fight. And going for the more kind of campy and out there stuff tends to work really well as far as everything is concerned. Like, it's just... The character, the threat that I created, I can't even remember what it was called anymore, but it was basically a speaker system. And I would just go really ham on it and had a funny voice for it and went over the top, and everybody loved it because it felt like Power Rangers. Also, get used to having putties just showing up randomly, or your minions should show up every so often to kind of surprise them, and they should show up in weird places. This is one of the things that happened all the time in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. They'd just be walking around and they go, wow, those people are acting kind of weird, and then they would turn around and they'd like go shoomp, and suddenly they're all putties, and you hear blah, 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 blah. And so that was always fun. Yeah, for the most part, thinking about it as a television series is going to make it easiest to be able to run the games, where you have breaking things down. You have scenes as the shortest period of time, and then you have episodes, which is a collection of scenes, and then you have a season, which is a collection of episodes. And you think about it, if you think about it in the terms of a television show, it actually plays really, really well. And because Transformers and G.I. Joe are all kind of television series that have been turned into RPGs, the Essence 20 system itself is built on this idea of scenes, episodes, seasons, to separate things out. And once you get into that mindset, it actually becomes pretty easy. You don't have to run a single session being a single episode or anything like that, but understanding how to kind of break things down in that will make it easier for you to run the game. But otherwise, like I said, the game itself is super fun to run. They have pre-written adventures if you want to. Like I said, I've got the Adventures in Angel Grove, which will take you from level 2 up to level 6, and will probably take you at least a dozen, if not closer to 20 or 30 hours worth of gameplay. There's an introductory adventure in there, and then everything from that point on is really just you getting to kind of sink your teeth in and starting to realize, okay, how do we want to create the villain? What kind of story arcs do we want to go on, and things like that. And then the other thing that's essential for GMing this game is understanding the idea of negotiation. Your players need to understand that when you ask for a roll or something like that, they should feel empowered enough to negotiate. It's like, why don't you give me a just so I can remember something here. Why don't you give me an athletics? Why don't you give me a strength athletics to check? And they'll go, you know what? To climb this fence, and they go, you know what? Instead of kind of brute forcing my way up this fence, can I use my speed acrobatics check in order to do that? Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. And because I have a specialization in maneuverability, can I basically use it to kind of parkour up this and roll a specialization? Well, yes, that is an essential part of GMing this, is understanding that the players should be negotiating with you as to what skills they're going to use, what specializations they're going to use, and they should be negotiating as far as which for upshifts or edges and snags and things like that. Those should all be part of the roles for the most part. And when you expect them to happen, they can happen very, very quickly. If you're not used to the idea of, if you're the kind of GM that you go, okay, this is the roll that you're going to make. I'm going to tell you to make it. Don't roll until I tell you to make it, and only roll the thing that I tell you to make. You're probably not going to have a great time running this, because it is meant to be a little bit more collaborative than that. And the GM should be always talking with the players about the rolls that they're making. But if you go into this embracing that idea, welcoming them to go, hey, can I use this ability instead? Or because this, and this, do you think I should get should I get edge on the roll? Or can I have an upshift on this because I've done this, and this? Or can I do this particular thing? Like, can I run along this wall to get behind the enemy, and can that give me an upshift on this? Or can I slide between their legs and, hit them as I go through to get an upshift on this, or something like that? That's what makes the game the most fun, is you need you need to really, really embrace the idea of negotiating. And again, once you do that, they're not going to be every single roll takes 20 minutes to negotiate. It should just be a, hey, can I use this skill instead? And can I use this specialization? Yeah, sure. Oh, can I also get an upshift for this thing? Yes, yeah, sure. Or no, we're not going to do that. And it's very quick, very easy, really, really fun. So, moving on. As far as additional resources, like I said, there are 2 Power Rangers RPG books that have been released. There is Adventures in Angel Grove, which adds a few more threats, which is really nice, and it's an actual adventure, so that's always fun. And then there's also the most recent one, which is Across the Stars, which adds 3 new 3 new roles, a bunch of new influences and origins, and a bunch of new perks and Zord powers, and just a ton of other things. They also have an entire section of new threats in that. It's a really, really solid book. In addition to that, there will be a link in the description, not only to be able to get the book from Renegade itself, but they have some free things as well. They have a bunch of additional threats that they released via Twitter when this first came out. So they're free, and you can download those. And they also have things like form fillable character sheets, which for me is an essential part of releasing an RPG system in the modern age. Because of my tremor, filling out a paper sheet is near impossible for me. No one can read anything that I write on that, including myself. So I need form fillable sheets, and they have them. I will have the links to all of those in the description. So definitely, if you want to pick up this game, pick those up as well. Moving on. So, final thoughts. Overall, I love the Essence 20 system. I'm a massive, massive, massive Power Rangers fan. And so being able to play a Power Rangers game, to show you how much of a Power Rangers fan I am, I had a parody D&D campaign that I ran for years. I technically could still run it. I just haven't had an event to run it for. Called The Mighty Extreme Heroes, or meh. And in two separate adventures for that, in two separate one-shots, because they're always one-shots. For that campaign, I have turned them into Power Rangers. One, they were Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and the second one, I basically had them replay the plot of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. I'm a massive, massive Power Rangers fan, so obviously I'm slightly biased on this. But from a purely RPG standpoint, the Essence 20 system is really solid. I have, because I've seen so many different RPG systems now, and I've experienced so many different ones, I have started to become much more. I tend to have a preference for kind of rules light system that allow for a lot of interpretation, a lot of customization by yourself without having to change all the mechanics. And Essence 20 for me is the right combination of there's enough rules here that you know what you need to do and what you don't want to do in any given situation. But it is broad enough and the wording is used is generalized enough that you really can create whatever you want and be able to play the exact kind of character you want. And that's really exemplified in the idea of the influences system specifically. The fact that your background you don't have to pick a specific background or make up your own. You get to mix and match multiple backgrounds to create the exact kind of character that you want to play. And I think that makes this system in and of itself one of the most customizable that exist. In addition to the fact that Power Rangers itself is very much kind of a perks or a feat-oriented system where a lot of the thing that's going to make your Ranger feel unique compared to other Rangers of the same color in other games and things like that, or if you do play multiple campaigns, the perks that you choose are vastly going to change how your character feels, as is the weapon that you choose. And the equipment that you use for your Ranger. Those are the two things that are really going to customize it compared to something like the G.I. Joe RPG system, where your subclass, or your focus is what they could call it in that, is going to be the thing that specializes you much more than the perks that you choose. So when you go into this with the idea that, you know, choosing your perks and choosing your Zord perks and stuff like that and choosing your equipment is going to be just as important as your influence and your role and things like that, you really start to understand just how much fun you can have with this. And like I said, I've actually played an entire mini campaign of this last December. We called it Power Rangers Night Sentinels, and it was an absolute blast. Some of the most fun I've ever had running an RPG ever. So overall, I think this is a phenomenal system, and I hope you guys get into this and get excited about it as I am, because I think it is phenomenal, and I want to see the Essence 20 system excel. My only problem with it right now is, dear Renegade Studios, if you're watching this, please stop releasing a lot of books at the same time, because I am very poor and I can't afford all of them. And like, I want to get the books, but they all come out like in the same month, and then I can't get all the books. Or if you'd really like to, you are welcome to just send to me physical or PDF. Don't care which. I prefer PDF, but I'll do anything. If you want to just send me a book, I'm totally okay with that, and I'll do an in-depth review for it, and I'll mention that you guys sent it to me, because that's what I gotta do. And yeah, you should totally do that. Message me on Twitter. I'm at Trader Jody. My DMs are open. Message me and send me stuff, okay? Anyway, that is gonna be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important in the comments down below. Every Power Rangers team has a theme, whether it's dinosaurs or ninjas or pirates. Super Mega Force, they were pirates and they never even acknowledged it. They never acknowledged it, carrying cutlasses and flintlock pistols, and they were pirates and they never said anything about it. Anyway, every Power Rangers team has a theme. So, in your ideal Power Rangers team, what is your theme going to be? let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I will see you guys the next time. All right? Bye-bye.